Let's take a look at some various hi-hat foot techniques. Now, surprisingly enough, this is an incredible instrument. There are so many sounds and so many things we can do with the hi-hat. I'm not referring to the whole drum set. I mean, we know that's already cool. This guy right here is going to become your best friend on the drum set. There's so many different sounds. Let's start off with the basic and obvious ones. Okay, so obviously, if I just step down on the pedal with heel up, I'm going to get a tight, crisp, chick type of sound. Something like this. So that would be heel up with a nice, tight, crisp hi-hat closing. If I play heel down, much the same as the application of the bass drum, I'm not going to get quite as much power as heel up because I'm not getting my whole leg into it. I'm just going to play from the ankle through the foot. So I'm still going to get a closing, but you can notice it's not going to be as crisp and as tight. So you can notice that that one is definitely a bit of a mellower sound. So now you have the tight, crispy one and the loose, sloshier one. Now the next one I'm going to do is also going to be heel down, but I'm not going to put as much pressure on the front of my foot to kind of give almost like an orchestral cymbal splash sound. When you got those guys in parades going whoosh, we can get that same application with our hi-hat. Watch this. Heel down, slightly bringing down pressure with my foot. Something like this. So you can see how I was letting that ring. So it's another nice sound. You get an initial attack of the two cymbals striking one another, and then letting the top cymbal ring. It's a nice, almost like a hi-hat sizzle, almost like a splash sound. Now let me show you what a hi-hat splash looks like. Okay. Now this one, what I'm going to do is going to be much more of an attack on the hi-hat, but I'm going to drive my heel into the foot plate. Now, what I do, and I've noticed a lot of drummers do this, especially if you have a size 9 foot or larger, I turn my foot a little bit to the left just so I can get my heel a little bit higher up on the foot plate, because if I just kick it here on the heel plate, I'm going to get nothing. So I want to try to get the sound by stepping on the bottom part of the foot plate of the hi-hat stand. Now if I have my foot directly on with the pedal, you can see what's happening with my foot. That's not going to quite work, and that's very uncomfortable. So this is the reason why my foot is over to the side when I get this hi-hat splash sound. Something like this. So with that one, you could see there was definitely more attack than the one I played previous. That's kind of a fun one, especially if you're rocking away and you want to get a really nice loud hi-hat sound. That's a great one. You can just play that on quarter notes or eighth notes or whatever your foot can possibly play at that time. So the next step to that technique is going back to almost like the heel-toe technique we talked about with the bass drum. And what this one is, I'm trying to think who I saw play this first. It might have been Marvin Smitty Smith or Tommy Campbell or one of those great drummers. And I was totally fascinated by this because it sounded like he was playing the hi-hat with his hand, with a stick, but it was simply just an open and close technique with the foot. And what it is you're going to do that initial splash that I just showed you with the heel coming out like that to splash the cymbal. Then your toe is going to come back in and close the hi-hat. So you're going to have this open and closed technique. So initially, I'm going to have my foot to an angle, so I'm going to go open, closed, open, closed, open, closed, open, closed. It sounds something like this. So that's a pretty cool sound. And if you can incorporate that with your everyday beats, maybe you're playing a beat on the ride cymbal, bass drum, and snare, try to add the element of hi-hat foot splashing is what it's been called. So that's a very cool one. Now, the next thing that I like to do, especially if I'm incorporating the hi-hat with a stick, the foot plays a very important role because depending on the sound that I want up here, it's all controlled by my foot. A lot of people don't put the two together and they go, oh, gee, I never thought of it that way. Well, if I play with my heel up, really pressing down on the pedal, and if I hit the hi-hat, listen to the crispiness and the tightness of the hi-hat. So as you can see, I've got quite a bit of weight on my leg pushing down on that pedal. So that's pretty much as tight as I can get it. Now, if I put my heel down and don't put so much pressure on the toe of the foot plate of the hi-hat stand, and I hit the hi-hat, listen to how this sounds. Now, if I take even more pressure off the front of my foot and completely relax my foot, so basically I don't have very much pushing down on the pedal, it's almost like my heel is just relaxing as if I was normally sitting down in a movie theater watching a movie. If I hit the hi-hat now, watch the sound, listen for the sound, what happens here. And one more example is if I completely take the pressure off the foot plate, but not my foot off, because if I take my foot off, it's going to lift the hi-hat. So I want to take it just so these guys are barely touching one another, almost so my hi-hats want to move a little bit. This would be great for you hard rocking guys. You know, you don't have to put too much pressure on the left foot. And now it's almost like I'm just simply holding the pedal down as lightly as I can to really get a beefy hi-hat sound. Something like this. So all those sounds have a very important role with that left foot. That left foot will do that. I'm going to give you a little example of something that I like to do when I do some drum solos, especially if I like to incorporate my hi-hat in the solos. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to play some simple patterns on the hi-hat with my sticks, but I'm going to change the pressure of my left foot on the pedal. And you hear the pitch change of the cymbals, okay? Now, I always say be careful if you have really cheap, pie plate cymbals. You don't want to press too hard on the pedal because you could, invert your bell. That's the bell of the cymbal right there. Make sure you got a decent set of hi-hats if you're going to try this at home, okay? Try this at home. So watch this. I'm just going to change the pressure of my foot as I'm playing just some simple patterns here on the hi-hat so you can hear the difference of what my foot's actually doing for this. Something like this. So that was kind of cool. It's actually fairly easy as well. And if you noticed, the only thing that was changing the pitch was my left foot. because I kept playing the hi-hat on the exact same spot every time. Very simple pattern. And it's entertaining because you can show this to people, especially non-drummers, and they're going to watch your hands and they're not going to be watching your foot. So it's kind of a bit of a magic trick there where they're going to wonder how you're doing that. So you can entertain yourself and drummers and non-drummers all around. Opening and closing the hi-hat can simply add element of time to your beat. If it's audible enough, meaning you can hear it, it's really going to add a nice sound over to the left side of your kit. In most cases when you're playing live, or especially in the recording studio, you're going to have a microphone just for the hi-hat itself. So developing that independence with the left foot, creating those different sounds, is going to add a whole new depth and dimension to your playing. That's also very important because sometimes you might be playing with some musicians that maybe their time isn't as good as yours. And by having that extra sound, if I'm just playing open and closed hi-hat with my left foot, they might be able to see it if they can't hear it. Maybe you're rocking out so loud that you can't really hear the hi-hat. The bass player might be able to see your left foot, or he might be able to see the hi-hat closing and go, ah, there's the time, because I know this drummer that I play with has awesome time. So not only is it audible, it's visual too, which really helps. And something you might notice that I do a lot when I play, especially if you're watching us play with the band tracks, is a lot of times I'll rock my foot, okay? And that's sort of my inner sense of time. So even when I'm holding the hi-hat shut, sometimes even when I'm playing just maybe quarter notes or eighth notes with the left foot, you might see my foot rocking. Well, that's actually doing nothing for the sound of the hi-hat. You hear nothing. That is just sort of my little way of saying, okay, this is where the time is. I'm feeling it internally. So even if I'm doing something that's completely different and, you know, maybe in a different type of time feel than what I'm playing with my left foot, that is my time source. That's just a habit that I developed. Something that I see a lot of guys do, though, is they'll get their heel hitting the foot plate. You don't want to do that, especially if you're in the recording studio or even live, because you can hear that. That will pick it up, unless you're going for that sound. Maybe it's something you can invent, saying, hey, I'm now playing, you know, my left foot on the foot plate of my hi-hat stand. But try not to get into the habit of actually hitting your heel plate on the hi-hat foot pedal there, because that's going to be a little bit annoying, especially to a recording engineer. And if you're doing this type of thing, if you happen to get into this habit, make sure your hi-hat's not squeaking. If it's going week, 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 you're just going to spray it with some oil. You know, it's an instrument that we use all the time, so there's a lot of moving parts in the hi-hat stand. So every now and then, don't be afraid to just give it a good coat with some WD-40. If you're not comfortable with that, take it to your local music store. Ask one of the drum guys there and say, hey, is there any way you can help me get rid of this squeak? Because hi-hat stands will sometimes tend to do that. They'll tend to squeak, and it's pretty easy to eliminate that in most cases. So anyways, that wraps it up for the hi-hat section. And have some fun with exploring your hi-hat sounds.